Thank you. Let's move on to contractual stuff. Now, we've really covered some of this, I guess, but certainly in terms of the requests for buyouts and all of that, and you mentioned earlier on, I'm just looking at my question here, we've covered so much of this, the idea that you perhaps, if it's a smaller project, you might say, okay, the budget's not too great, but I'll give you an irrevocable license in perpetuity to use the music in the game. So let's return to the subject of secondary exploitation. And if you are negotiating these things, what's the best way of handling that contractually? Should that all be upfront in the agreement somehow?
Yes.
Seconded.
That's what you mean. Yeah, I mean, this is another thorny issue for me, secondary rights. There's a couple of companies out there that try and buy these, not from the big companies like Sony, but they'll enter a small developer, small publisher, small film company and try and buy those composer rights and promise the world and say, we're going to sell your music and you're going to be rich for the rest of your lives. We're going to get that David Beckham perfume ad. Sorry, that's Victoria, whatever. And in my experience, 20 years, it's very, very, very rare that they'll be able to pick up too many secondary uses. So, but what we do, we put in our contracts that if there is a sync, it's a sync license. If there's a separate sync, nothing to do with the game, then we'll share any income 50-50. I think that's fair.
But I suppose it's not always in the games company's interest. I'm thinking of examples that I've certainly come across where the games company might say, well, we really don't want our music used for anything other than our franchise. I mean, that must be something you can... Tom's going to come in on that as well in a minute.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's totally true. I mean, if you've got some big iconic IPs that are, even bigger than some films that are really strong themes, you're not going to get the developer or publisher to relinquish those. However, there's a lot more music within those games that is less, iconic, or it's more this sort of underscore, and it's that is used or can be used. So I think the developers are just a bit more cautious of. They're very protective and of their game, and so they should be. But I guess it's just getting a balance really of what being too overprotective essentially of their baby, and it's got to grow up.
Tom, you want to come back?
I mean, there are opportunities that are relatively uncontroversial, so you can understand that games developers might not want their soundtrack used, in association with another brand. But lots of games are now enjoying, lots of music, is enjoying a life outside of the game. So on streaming services like Spotify, for example, and it's really important to understand how that's going to work up front. But that's an opportunity that you would have thought that in most cases that can be taken advantage of, generate additional revenue, but it doesn't diminish the brand or the game in any way.
Okay, let's move on and just because we have covered so much of that already. Contract clauses from hell, things that composers just really should run away from or be very, very careful about. I mean, let's kick off with, as you say, one has to be careful about what one says, but I mean, so indemnity clauses, that's something that I think we always have to be rather wary of, where basically you're being asked to sign something that says you will not infringe anybody else's copyright by creating this music, and that if you do, you will basically indemnify the company against all claims, costs, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I had this with, got to be careful what I say.
Yeah, do.
A major US studio where one of my clients was veering too close to the temp, and they were getting, too far away from the temp, and they were trying to persuade me to call my client and say, can you copy the temp? And I am...
Can you just explain exactly what you mean by that for those who...
So in a film, they'll lay up music. It might be a piece from James Newton Howard, and the director will fall in love with it and won't want to veer from it. And your composer is being asked to basically take the inspiration and the style and the colour and create something new, a bit like Richard just did with that other Sync piece. So in this case, the studio rang me and said, your client needs to stick to the temp. And I said, well, that's a problem because we've indemnified you. So if you don't have anything to worry about, but if James Newton Howard decides that that's his piece of music, the composer's going to get sued, and you're fine because we've indemnified you. But then I had this lovely conversation in a pub at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday night with this lawyer from LA, and I'm going, well, I'm trying to think about this because now you own the music, my client doesn't, so why should we indemnify you? We've had to give you all our rights, and we thought about this about 3 months earlier. So if you own the music 100%, and why should we indemnify you? In fact, we're going to take that back, thank you very much. So, but it doesn't quite work as easily as that. So it's something that is going to become more and more of an issue. I mean, I have to say 90% of our contracts do have indemnity clauses, and it's up to each individual composer to be strong. And another example where an agent has to step in sometimes and say, listen, audio director or whoever, we know you've got temp love. On behalf of our client, please, you've got to be careful. We are not going to take a risk. I've seen it a few times where clients get sued and it's not pretty, it's not happy, and it doesn't help anybody. And there are only 12 notes in a scale, so it is contentious, but it's not going away.
Do you think, I mean, obviously there's the high end, the kind of, massive projects, the huge budgets, but just for the kind of average jobbing guy who's, writing music for an indie game or something, do you think it's reasonable to ask to insert the word knowingly infringe, and maybe to say, okay, I get what you need. There's good faith here. I'm not going to copy somebody else's music, but I'll indemnify you to the value of this contract. That sort of thing. Is there any mileage in that? So in other words, you're saying I'll give you, everything I've earned from this if that happens.
Yeah,
or is that pointless?
Yeah, that has happened. That can happen. But I prefer to educate and talk to our clients and say, you have to be very strong with it. If you feel that it is too close, you have to back off. You really have to back off and educate whoever you're working for to say, I'm not going to go near that. I'd love to, but because it's easy. But also, I'm a composer. I create. I don't want to copy. And in fact, if you want me to copy, I'm probably the wrong person for the job. But
what about the example, maybe you want to come on this, where you don't mean to do it? You have, I
mean,
it's a tough one.
A composer has to have the responsibility that they're not going to knowingly plagiarise someone else's music, and you really have to take that seriously. I mean, in my case, I do, like Darrell said, I have to most of the time indemnify a games publisher or developer. One very large publisher insists that I have, I think it's either $3 or $5 million worth of coverage for copyright infringement, which I do. It's just a standard insurance thing. I hate temp music anyway. Thankfully, in games, it doesn't exist that much compared to film, in my experience, and especially because of the interactive nature of a lot of the scores I write, it's kind of impossible to just stick a bit of linear music in there. But having worked on some licensed IPs in the games industry, if a client says to me, if an audio director or producer says, we prefer this cue from blah, blah, blah film, whatever it was, I just say, well, I want your game to sound like your game, not something else. And you do have to be sort of strong with them without being too forceful. But you say, it's not just that there's a questionable legal situation here, but why do we want to just copy everything? We innovate, we create, we want it to sound like the game.
But okay, so I won't be like a dog with a bone here, but just what about the example where, you come up with your piece of music, everybody loves it, and then some bright spark says, do you realise this is exactly the same as this other thing? And you don't know you've done it. I mean, does that just mean you're a crap composer, or does that just
Are you talking about once the games come out, being released?
Well, no, Well,
beforehand, obviously, it'll have to get changed. But
yes, if you realise, But if you don't realise,
I've worked with EA recently, and they've got a legal department that check the music. They hire musicologists to just run through the final game, and we've had a few cues rejected because of that. But if it's a smaller game and an indie game and it's released and somebody says, hang on a minute, you've just taken a piece of my music, well, then it can get a bit nasty. But generally, I think, I don't know if ALASTAIR agrees here, but a lot of the publishers who may own that music, or the composer may own that music, are pretty reasonable. You can get a letter and they'll say, here's my client's piece, this is your piece. oh, he must have listened to it in the kitchen the night before making a chili and been influenced by it. And if you just, sometimes I've sat there and laughed and gone, oh, bloody hell, it really is similar. And if you just go, I don't know what happened, hands up, it was, then often it's a question of, I'm afraid, going back to the games company and saying, this has happened, and having to sign those rights and maybe paying a sync fee. Any royalties you've earned are going to have to go to that new person. That's happened 3 or 4 times in 20 years, so it's pretty rare. But I think the best outcomes have been, oh dear, honesty, really sorry, straight away, and no bullshit. And actually, most publishers are pretty, I don't know if you agree with me, but pretty fair with that.
Okay, let's move on from that and just talk about something I'm interested to ask you about is the concept of sort of approval and how that relates to payment, and kind of what constitutes approval and revision. What kind of things should you not sign up to in terms of music creation agreements? Who wants to go on that? Nobody.
Well, I'll try. I mean, it is a bit of a complex area, but in general, I would never sign anything for unlimited revisions. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
So would you want it to be specified?
Most of the times, yeah. I mean, if it was a really, really big game with a really long time scale and a really decent budget, that's different. If it's a very short mobile project, for example, then I'm not going to sit there and rewrite the same. Yeah. Sorry, the reason I was laughing, there's a colleague who's in the audience who we were working on a project a couple of months back, and I wrote this piece about twice, and it was really frustrating because the temp track was something that I'd written. So it's like I can't write it I can't be writing it too differently. But yeah, I think whatever's reasonable, I mean, yeah, changes will come in. If it's a complete rewrite, maybe they've hired the wrong person, or they have no clear vision about, what they want for the game. But in general, there's no reason why it's, I think hardly ever in my career I've hardly ever done a complete rewrite. It's normally just a quick tweak here and there. And often it's just, can you make it longer because we like it so much? So, but yeah, there should always be an end point. I don't know how Darrell deals with it.
In the wording of the contract to just put some parameters on that.
I don't know.
I've seen with
again,
them without. I've seen both.
Again, we're in a creative, collaborative industry here, and I mean, I think I'm spoiled in that a lot of my clients work at the very high end, and the fees are so good that you can't really say you're only going to be able to rewrite every 2 times. Because that's conflict before you started. So if the fees are very good, I agree with Richard that we leave it woolly, quite frankly, because it's collaborative. And if you're onto your 6th co-write, there's a problem anyway. Not co-write, rewrite. So I think in a smaller game, absolutely, if the budgets are low, then we have to be, it's sometimes harder work because we have to be very clear with our contracts and say, there might be 1 or 2 rewrites. We're just going to deliver you 40 minutes of music, and that's it. And we're going to own the publishing. We're going to own the record rights. We're going to own everything, and we'll deliver it on Monday. So it's as simple as that. But every job is different. Every composer is different. So it's really how you feel. And if you've had a bad experience with that company before, where this has happened, then you'll be ringing your agent and say, the next time I work for them, I want to put something in the clause. So I'm afraid there's no clear answer to that question.
Alistair.
I guess, rewrites probably often happen at the beginning of a project when you're really getting to grips with the creative. And actually that can be a lot down to the composer and the developer understand the requirements and have the correct brief, and that is about a collaboration and spending time understanding what you're doing, what you're delivering. But I've never, it's very rare that it's actually been doing rewrites, and we make sure as well that there's not infinite rewrites, and if it's a total, pretty much a different cue, then it's a different cue. That's a different. You pay for a different cue there and move on, and. Whether that's contractual, I don't know, but it's definitely it's made clear that we're fair on both sides.
Yeah, and I think from an interesting point of view, an inspirational point of view, a lot of my clients that do very well when they first approach a project and they have a meeting or a spotting session with whoever that is, the audio directors or whatever medium they're writing for. They will go away and they will absorb what the information, and they'll write a theme or a suite of sounds. And I know Hans Zimmer does this. I know that John Williams won't necessarily sign on to a project until he feels like he's got the theme. I remember working on Harry Potter with, I remember James is in the audience. He wrote the games for Harry Potter. I've worked on a few of the films. And I remember the head of music at Warner Brothers saying to me that initially on the very first Potter, John Williams, he wouldn't accept the gig. He just said, no, I just can't get it. I can't get it. And they were starting to look for another composer, apparently. And John Williams rang the head of music at Warner Brothers and said, I've got it. Da, 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 da. And he was so happy that he'd found the sound, and the directors loved that sound. And from there, I'm making, it sounds easy, but it flowed from there. And it's the same with any job. So I think that rewriting things, if they're not happy at the beginning, that's where the problem starts.
Can I just add something very quickly? Also, at the beginning of the project, and this is happening to me, right now because I'm on a big project and it's quite early. The game's changing so much almost daily that there's one QA I have rewritten 4 times because actually that part of the game has changed dramatically, that everything keeps changing. So we've just created a folder called the sin bin, and the audio director's going to reuse that if it's applicable anywhere else. So the games do change as they're being developed, as you know.
Let's talk about filthy lucre and payment schedules. So I mean, how should composers expect to get paid? Should they expect to get some provision on signing? And how do you kind of lay things out?
So that's how we do it. Is actually it's a collaboration, a negotiation between the composer, the agent, and ourselves, and actually what works best for both parties. At the end of the day, we've got a budget and we're going to spend it. So how we spend that is kind of irrelevant. Is the composer, what we don't want is the composer to run out of money and go, I need to do another job quickly, and then is off working in Sainsbury's, not writing music, something like that. But that could happen. So you want to keep them focused and you want to keep them happy and sensible payments. And actually, as Rich pointed out, game development is quite fluid and can shift. So when we kind of set out the dates and the terms and stuff, that's not set in stone. That's a guideline that will move. And every time you kind of it's communication. It's got right. Okay, this isn't quite done. Let's okay, we'll pay you for that. And it's making sure everybody's happy. I can't comment on anyone else, but that's how we like to approach it.
Can we appoint you kind of worldwide head of all game publishing music contracts?
Yeah, if you want to pay me for it.
See Darrell afterwards. Okay, yeah.
I mean, historically, pretty much every single project I've done has been in milestone payments with something for signing on up front, something during the development, and then something on final mix delivery and acceptance. The one I'm on now is actually a little bit strange because the publisher's attorney in LA sort of was dealing with my agent, and initially there was only 2 milestones. One next Christmas saying, deliver 2.5 hours of music, and one the following Christmas say, deliver another 2.5 hours of music. And I'm like, well, that means I won't get paid for 1.5 years, so that's not really going to work for me, and I might be working in Tesco's. And of course, it was just an easy thing to fix, but actually, the way we worked that one, it's per 15 minutes of music delivered and accepted, and that's pretty standard for me, so it still works out a milestone every month or a couple of months, so it works.
And just very briefly, going slightly back to the orchestral recording thing, generally, would you expect the composer or the games company to be dealing with the budgets and paying for live orchestra? And let's go to you, because you have a very fine live orchestra, and in fact, you're a world-class violinist, I gather. He was, yeah. Anyway, who's dealing with that contractually, all that stuff?
Well, in the gaming world, it tends to be that the fees, and I quite like it this way, the fees are set for the composer, and that's their creative fee. And then if there are live production budgets, we'll talk to ALASTAIR or whoever we're dealing with at any company, draw up a budget with the musician contractor in the studio, and that'll have the copyists, the orchestrators, the engineers, the mix studios, and depending whether we're delivering whatever system we're delivering, and draw a budget up, get that approved, and then generally in our company, we will then move to hire everybody and manage that system, and then we will get the money up front. So, and whether we're recording it in Los Angeles or in Eastern Europe, or, whoa, even in Shanghai a couple of years ago. So we will just manage that. So it feels like brushing your teeth to me because we do it every day, but it might seem complicated to others, but it's pretty standard.
Cool. Okay, let's move on. Time is marching forward.